You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast. Listeners, literally, I love to use that word literally when it really matters. 70 countries, all 50 states, 1,400 some cities. We're so grateful for all of you. We know why you're here. It's because we're bringing you the very best fiction, the most gifted authors who we have with us today. Nita Prose. Thank you, Nita, for joining us today.
Oh my goodness. I'm so happy to be here with both of you and with all the fans out there.
Well, we want to give a little bit about you before we get started. We're here to talk about Nita's new released book, The Mystery Guest, which we loved. It is the sequel to The Maid. You all are familiar with The Maid. We loved it. It was the debut novel for Nita. It hit the Sunday Times, the Irish Times bestseller. It was an instant #1 New York Times bestseller, Good Morning America book club pick, and sold over 1 million copies. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And as if this isn't enough, now we hear that Universal Pictures has optioned this book for rights for the film with the Academy Award nominee Florence Pugh to star as Molly. Perfect.
It's a pretty good choice. Yes.
Perfectly casted. Well, we have to say that Nita's writing has been recommended and endorsed by a lot of people, some of which are good friends with BOOKSTORM Podcast who we've had on our show. And I want to name them. Cherie Lapina loves it. Nina de Gramont recommends it. Ashley Audrin, Mary Kubica, Karma Brown. And as if this isn't enough, you also have been recommended and endorsed by the New York Times Book Review. It was an editor's pick. Stephen King mentioned you in Twitter. We've got NPR, Real Simple, Woman's Weekly, Library Journal, Publishers Weekly. I could go on and on. Very well deserved. And we know why. It's just a great story and we can all relate to it. And I want to talk about Molly the Maid, and I'm going to quote Ashley Audrin because she summed it up the best. She said, Molly the Maid has captured my heart. I loved this charming and utterly original whodunit. Molly's an eccentric and unforgettable sleuth who captivated me and kept me furiously turning the pages. Put this on your to-read pile immediately. Kristen and I agree. If you haven't read The Maid, get it, but you got to get this one too. The Mystery Guest. Welcome, Nita.
Thank you so very much for that warm and lovely introduction.
Well, Nita, we're here, of course, to talk about this new fantastic book, and it is a mystery. So I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but I do want to give our listeners just kind of a summary of some of the factual background that's going on. Now, as Chris mentioned, and as you know, we all love this character, Molly Gray. She is not quite like anyone else. She's got a flair for cleaning, and she loves proper etiquette. Now, she has risen through the ranks of the glorious 5-star Regency Grand Hotel in this new book to become the head maid. And just as her life reaches a state of perfection and tidiness, just like she likes it, her world is turned upside down when a murder happens at the hotel. And it is J.D. Grimthorpe, a very famous mystery author. Now, the hotel is hosting his fan club. There are people in and out. We have law enforcement coming in. And there's one question on everybody's lips, and that is, who killed J.D. Grimthorpe? And we've got a lot of suspects, of course. We wonder if it's Lily, the maid in training, if it's Serena, the author's secretary, and what about our beloved doorman, Mr. Preston? And what about Molly herself? She's been a suspect before. In your story, Molly alone has the key to what has happened to Mr. Grimthorpe, but it is buried way deep down in her past. And that's what unravels throughout the course of this story. Did you want to add any facts that you think might be important that
Oh
aren't
my
a giveaway?
goodness. I think that was an absolutely brilliant summary. So I think the only thing I would say is that readers of The Maid will be rewarded by new glimpses of some of their favorite characters, some of them which you mentioned, Mr. Preston, Gran, Molly, of course, is our leading lady once more, and little glimpses of Juan Manuel, Molly's boyfriend. So yes, so I think you could pick up the new book and just read it fresh if you've never read anything. You haven't read The Maid before, or you could start with The Maid and read this one. It works either way.
I agree.
So true. And I'm going to put a little teaser out there for our listeners. You're going to love this, Molly the Maid. Here's what I loved: her honesty, her bluntness, her ability to cut through the drama and pretense and get to the truth. Molly said something, and I'm going to quote her. Ever since I was a small child, I've been told in direct and indirect ways that I'm a failure. I'm not good enough. She doesn't meet the bar. She fails to grasp what others understand with relative ease. Oddball Moll. But thanks to you, Nita, as the author, we began to understand that those very differences are what made Molly so special and intuitive and wise. Could you expand upon your creation of this very important character? Because we all need to hear that different is okay now and then, and that it can be a very special thing not to fit in.
Yes. Well, when I was writing this book, I thought I was writing something very personal, actually, with both books. And I thought I was tapping into my own sense of times in my life where I didn't feel I socially fit. That terrible feeling you have when you're at a party and suddenly there's nobody to talk to, and you're, that wallflower in the corner, and you just don't know what to do. I think that's a universal feeling. We've all had those moments, whether they're at a party or elsewhere, or maybe in our childhoods or whatever, when we just don't know how to behave socially and we feel left out. And it's an awful, awful feeling. And that led me to thinking, what would it be like to live your life in that way all the time, to always not know what to say, to put your foot in your mouth all the time? And I think Molly, despite her very, very best intentions, and her intentions are pure gold, they're always good, she doesn't have, all the social cues that people expect. And there are those out there who are vicious enough to really attack and undermine her for that. And I think we have all had that experience. So what I felt was, a very personal character that I was creating that was coming from the fabric of something I knew. Turns out it's a universal truth.
Absolutely, it is. And yes, you're right. I think every one of us needs to feel that. And you know what I found in the course of my own life? I feel that quite often the most intelligent, intuitive people are not the life of the party. They're not the one who picks up on social cues. Yes. Or maybe they don't even have time to worry so much about it because they're thinking of more intelligent, more important issues. Molly sort of opened up to the world that that's okay to be who you are.
Well, it's like Molly says, be careful what you assume, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And I think your point about, the lack of social butterflies in the room, sometimes those people are the most astute, and very often they're the most compassionate as well. And I think part of the point of experiencing Molly and reading the book is to step into the experience of being her and living as her. I want the reader to step behind her eyes and feel what it's like to be that person, and to always try your best, have a deep sense of compassion for other people, and yet somehow be marginalized a lot of the time.
Yeah, and we did. Thank you.
Nita, Molly's Gran had a tremendous influence on her. Molly recounts a day when both she and Gran experienced something pretty traumatic. Later that night, Gran prepared iced tea and biscuits, and tea, according to her, Gran fixed everything. And then Gran wrapped her hands around Molly's and guided her to bed. This poignant scene was very beautiful to me. And Molly remarks to the reader, and this is a quote, "My Gran, she always found a way to ignite hope. And what is hope? if not the decision, to shine light into the dark. Hope seemed very intentional to Gran. Is it?
It is. And thank you for picking up on that. I think that's, that's the beating heart of the book. Gran is an exceptional individual, and she has had the very difficult job of guiding Molly throughout her entire life. She's a person who lacks means in a lot of ways, and yet she has done the most exquisite job of raising Molly to be good and kind and smart and dedicated and hardworking and every other possible adjective you could ascribe that is positive in nature. And that comes from a deep-seated hope. And hope is a driver for her. It gets her through trauma. And through the course of the mystery guest, Molly starts to move. In the first book, she starts to understand herself and other people a little bit. And in this book, she starts to glean an understanding of who her Gran was and get very curious about that. She wants to know who Gran was, and she goes back into her memories of her childhood, as we all do as adults, and she revisits them from a different perspective. And you know that feeling when you remember something that happened as a child, that how you can see it two ways. You can see it with your child's eyes, and you can also see it with your adult eyes, and you can learn so much from that dual perspective. That is the process that Molly engages with as she moves through the mystery guest, in order to understand not only who Gran was, but who she was and how they came to be as people. And that is fundamentally about hope. I think they're very underprivileged in a lot of ways, and they've experienced deep-seated traumas, which Molly is only beginning to understand. And Gran's way of dealing with that was always with that positive can-do attitude. And I think if you have a matriarch like that in your life, or even in your pages, then it's a true gift. And I tried to give that gift to the readers. We aren't always so lucky to have a Gran in our lives. Some of us are. I certainly was, in the form of my mother, who was very much like that, with that constant positivity, that signal of hope all the time, unconditional love for her family. But, if you don't have such a person, Gran still exists, and she can ignite hope in anyone.
Very well said. And I loved throughout the book how we saw Molly maturing in ways that were just beautiful to see, because she was, exactly as you said, examining what had happened and then choosing to either learn from it, to maybe move forward from it. But that maturity was just full of wisdom, that entire journey, because of Gran's wisdom coming through. And what a beautiful, beautiful character arc for both of them.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm intrigued by the idea that our past holds our future. And I try to create a structure in the book that really infused that notion, that the only way we can move forward with any confidence and understanding into a better future is by really understanding our past. And Molly really has to do that in order to solve the present tense mystery.
Yes. Absolutely.
So true. And that sort of falls into my next question. Molly said something else very wise. I'm going to quote this too. There are moments in life that are so seismically altering, they divide everything, cutting a clear rift in time between before and after. Molly experienced this very powerfully the day that her Gran died. Again, one time when she saw her Gran mishandled by a maid. And it struck the reader that Molly did not ignore those important moments, that space between what I knew before and what I know then. How did Molly, and how do any of us, allow those seismic moments in life to shape us positively and not negatively, and try to use them for the good?
Well, I think it really is, in essence, about the before and after. The during, let's say, is the trauma piece so often, or the lack of understanding. When something happens to you in the moment, you cannot understand it because you're experiencing it. It's too fresh and raw. You can't digest it in any way. But through the process of digestion, we can grow. And I try to track that experience in Molly. As she grows more mature, she starts to have a sense not only of herself, but of others and their journeys, not just her own, and how we are finally all different and all exactly the same.
Yeah. So true.
Very true. That is
More
so
true.
true. There's a very cool theme running throughout your story, another one relating to what we see and what we don't see. Now, there were several characters who tried, ultimately in vain, to control what people saw. But Molly had tremendous powers of observation. And it was often what she didn't see that struck her and revealed something or gave her a new awareness. Why are the things that we don't see sometimes so revealing?
I'm fascinated by negative space, right? And I think as human beings, we have the capacity to fill in the blanks. We're hardwired to do that. We want to fill it in. If there's a piece missing in the puzzle, we'll still see the whole picture, even though there's a piece missing. Our brain fills that in. And I am fascinated with that process, especially through memory, and how somebody, for instance, in absence, can be more presence than they might have been in real life. And so it is with Gran. When the story begins, and the same with the maid, Gran is already deceased. She's long gone. And yet in her absence, she speaks with such clarity. She is so near and dear to Molly that she hears her almost maybe more than she did in real life. She's able to synthesize, crystallize the essence of what Gran meant to her. And so Gran becomes an even stronger moral compass. This is something that I've experienced in my own life. My mother died several years ago now, and I hear her voice all the time. She's not here. Her absence has been what I've dealt with for many, many years. And yet that absence is transmuted into presence because her voice is somehow essentialized in my head. And she speaks to me now in more powerful ways than she ever even did in real life. And I'm deeply interested in our ability to create the thing that we need. To find in a message or a voice or someone who's gone, that wisdom or that guidance that propels us forward. And that is, to me, the fact that we can do that is the greatest mystery of all.
Yeah. I like what you said too about that negative space, because often people try to fill it with other things, but I love that idea of sitting in it and allowing things in that negative space that you could, learn from and be comforted by. And what a really, really intriguing concept.
I think so. And I think you're right. That is it is interesting how some people will run from it. They'll run from that space as a coping mechanism, when perhaps the best thing to do is to listen and see what fills it.
And isn't it a treasure, truly, in an entire life lived and gone, that they're not really gone, but we, the next generation, are still drawing upon their life experiences, their mistakes, and their lessons learned. And Molly remembers all of these quotes, these sayings that her grandmother said. I wrote a couple down because they're gems. There's this one: everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. There's no point in boxing with buffoons. It's about moving the tarnish to reveal the shine. Love it. Love them all. Oh, I like this one. When love is blind, frogs resemble princes. Well, we can all relate to those.
Well, yes, we can.
And then she says this, you wrote this a few times in the story, and I'm thinking that this one must be important to you. When Gran says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We've all heard it. It rang anew through your characters.
I tried to give them lives where that would be a summary of their beginning and middle and end, in a way, and to create a structure that echoed that beautiful prayer, I think. One of my biggest fears is to grow old before I grow wise. And I think Gran had that fear as well. To have a life of meaning means that you get better over time, the way Molly does. And I hope that for myself as well. But somehow that serenity prayer for me encapsulates a way of being mindful about everything you do for your entire life.
Mm-hmm. Perfect example, such words of wisdom. And we just love this book. Let me hold it up again for our YouTube watchers. The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose. If you haven't read The Maid, pick that up too. Get both of them. And before we let you go, can you tell us what you're working on next?
Well, I'm working on a few things. And one of the things I'm starting to think about is whether there might be another journey for Molly. And when I was finished the first book, The Maid, my publishers were very keen on more Molly. And I heard from a lot of fans saying, more Molly, give me more. And what I said then was, I will only give you more if I can figure out a way not to give you less. And, I think with a character like this, my fear was that I've given it over. She's not mine anymore. Molly is the reader's. She doesn't belong to me. And I would hate to do damage to that character that now belongs to them. So I hope that I've done her fidelity with the Mystery Guest, and I will give more if I can find a way to do it and also honor Molly and my readers at the same time. So that's the pursuit I'm in at the moment.
Well, we, as a couple of readers right here, we say, give us more.
I'm trying. I promise I've tried my best.
All right. Well, listeners, you're just going to love this book. Thank you to Nita Prose for joining us here on BOOKSTORM. You're going to want to connect with her. You can find her at nitaprose.com. She's on X and she's on Instagram. Keep an eye on what she's doing. And we hope to see you back here next year with the next book.
Here's hoping. I will happily come back on and talk to you both.
Thanks
Wonderful.
so much.
Okay. There were so many interesting topics that just came up in that conversation. And I want to go back to something that you were talking about and commented on, Chris. She had brought up this idea of negative space and talked about hearing her mother. And you really, I almost got a little choked up because you were talking about hearing these people that we love and hearing their voice and being guided by them, even when they're gone. And I was wondering, have you ever experienced that? Because I feel like I have.
Don't you think? I absolutely do. I think if there's someone in your life that we're very close to, in my case, it was both of my grandparents and my mother and father are gone. And I, in any difficult situation, try to remember what they said, what they would have said, what they would have done, difficulties they went through, hurdles that they overcame. And yes, I absolutely, I've got my niece, my 30 nieces and nephews hate it when I say this, but I'm just going to say it. I think that between this world and the next, there are some things that cannot be separated. And one of those things is love. Love lasts forever. I don't think it came from this world. It's too big. It's generated bigger than the universe. It's above us and around us and over us. So why would love stop just because someone is not in their physical body anymore? I like to think it lasts forever. So with that, who knows what comes with it? What do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree. And, like Molly kept not only hearing her grand's voice, it was her grand's wisdom. And maybe it gave her guidance for the next step and how she should interpret a situation. And I think we do that too, don't we? Like you were talking about with your grandparents, but the things you're hearing are their wisdom, their love, their affirming of you. And boy, that is important. And it just reinforces, I think, how significant the time that we spend with one another is, because that's when you hear their voice and you hear their wisdom, is by just walking or doing or driving.
And what about this idea of continued eternal pride in your grandchildren and your kids, or support, or we believe in you forevermore? It doesn't mean that everyone has to be standing right next to you to make your lineage, your heritage, your legacy, and people who've gone before you, generations and generations, proud of what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be something big and famous. It could just be how you're living your life in an honest way. But yeah, I feel that with me, that presence with me. Absolutely. Let me say one more thing. I just love this character, Molly, so much. And I want to be like her too. I want to be able to say blunt truths when in an environment where it's not expected, but very much needed. Okay, now I'll tell you one that she said. Mr. Grimthorpe got angry with her, and then he said he was sorry. And she says this, I forgive you, Mr. He says, please forgive me. She says, I forgive you, Mr. Grimthorpe. But do you know what sorry means? You never make the same mistake again. Well, yep, there you go, Molly. Wouldn't it be nice if every time we forgave someone, we'd say, I do forgive you, but don't do it again. This is little words of wisdom right there. And Mr. Grimthorpe is so taken aback by her truth, but he also has great respect for it.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the out of the mouths of babes, saying has so much truth, because children don't have the filters that we do. And sometimes they'll just come out and say, your teeth are yellow, or, your breath stinks, whatever it is. But yes, as adults, don't we really sometimes want that, where somebody can just lay it on the line and say, look, this is not okay, or this is fantastic. Keep doing more of this. I agree with you on that one.
I just love that. Let me tell you what else he said. So Mrs. Grimthorpe, the wife, who was very know-it-all, bossy, and like above everyone, she says, no person should waste a chance at betterment. And Molly says, in her childlike, including you, Mrs. Grimthorpe. And I love that too. It's all throughout the whole book. I just kept underlining and highlighting everything. It is refreshing. It's just, I think we could all take a lesson on it to a certain extent. Don't you?
Absolutely. And think about too, Molly, you described her in the beginning quite well. She is somebody who took pride in her work. She wanted it to be as close to perfection as possible because it mattered to her. And I think any job that you do, no matter what the job is, when you do it with excellence, that is very impactful on people. And I think that's one of the reasons why this character has resonated with people, because she does what she does with excellence.
I like that. And I wanted to add this. Her grandmother, I believe it was her grandmother, who wanted her to achieve something greater than the grandmother had, which is what most of us do in this world. We have children, a little bit, we live vicariously through them. We want them to do greater things than even we did. Greatness does not equate to more and more college degrees and the highest paying job out there. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And I loved when Molly said, I want to be a maid like you, Gran, the very best one ever. And sure enough, she did. She was very highly regarded at this hotel. Her work was pristine. She took pride in it, and she was honored as a result of it. I liked that about her.
Yeah, I agree. We all need to do that, more of that, and do our jobs with excellence, whatever it is. I love that.
Absolutely. Well, listeners, thanks again for joining us here. We're very excited. We are getting very close to 100 interviews here. We're going to be celebrating a little anniversary pretty soon, and we're pretty happy about that. And here's who we've got coming up, so stay on the radar. Patricia Cornwell, Unnatural Death. Jenny Colgan, Midnight at the Christmas Bookshop. Jacqueline Machard, A Very Inconvenient Scandal. Virginia Cantra, The Fairy Tale Life of Dorothy Gale. Nick Petrie, The Price You Pay. Jill Chavis, The Bright Spot. Viola Shipman, The Wishing Bridge. Mary Kubica, She's Not Sorry.
And listeners, thank you for sharing our socials, for interacting with us. We are very thankful and grateful for you. We want to continue to bring you these fantastic authors, so just stay on the radar with us. You can find us on bookstormpodcast.com. We have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have TikTok. You can find us on X. And of course, stay on YouTube with us, because there you can see a lot of our authors in person, and we have tons and tons of videos that you can look back at. They are fantastic. Until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep with life-changing fiction.